Now let's turn to our studio in Times Square, where I'm joined by Raphael Marcus, non-resident fellow in the Department of War Studies at King's College London, and author of the new book, Israel's Long War with Hezbollah, Military Innovation and Adaptation Under Fire. And Raphael, you've worked on this book a long time, and it may just be the go-to book on this nearly 40-year-old conflict. Can we start, please, with something far more recent, from recent days, that was not included in your book, and that is Hassan Nasrallah's claim that Israel did not discover or destroy all of the tunnels it has.
Hi, Barbara. Thanks for having me. Hassan Nasrallah gave an interview just 3 days ago to Al Mayadeen TV, so unfortunately I didn't make the cut in the book. But he does point out that the IDF did destroy some of the tunnels, but as part of Hezbollah's, in a sense, psychological warfare, he claims that they're more out there, that some of the tunnels were at least 13 years old before the 2006 war, and then he refuses to sort of confirm or deny if there are more tunnels out there and if Hezbollah will choose to use those to attack the Galilee in the future. He actually uses the term constructive ambiguity, and that's from the interview itself. Sort of interesting because it, in a sense, mirrors, until a few days ago as well, the IDF's own policy of ambiguity regarding its airstrikes in Syria and Lebanon.
Now, your book is talking about the learning process, and we do know that at least there is an attempt here in Israel to take Nasrallah literally, to take him at his word, to take him seriously. Long gone are the generals that would pass off Hezbollah as a band of terrorists. It is a formidable foe. So what does your book conclude?
The book essentially traces the processes of learning, innovation, and adaptation between both sides, and traces how Hezbollah, in a sense, emerged as a ragtag bunch of guerrillas within the Lebanese civil war, and essentially learns the right lessons and evolves throughout the 80s and 90s, enhancing its guerrilla warfare capabilities, acquiring technology, perfecting its sort of rocket doctrine and the use of precision rockets, which started in the early 90s, but is perfected in a sense by 2006 and has only gotten better. And discusses the period after the Israeli withdrawal from 2000 up to and including and after the 2006 Lebanon war, which was sort of the culmination of Hezbollah's 2 to 3 decades of learning leading up to 2006. Of course, the learning process hasn't stopped, and each side has learned lessons since then as well.
Well, my takeaway from your book is that despite all these technological Israeli innovations, the Iron Dome and the Trophy anti-tank defense system, that when it comes to being able to quickly learn and implement what is learned, that Hezbollah had the upper hand. Is that correct?
I think Hezbollah has proven itself to be a very adept learning organization. The IDF has more of a mixed record, but I think since 2006 and the 618-page Winograd Commission report, Israel has also learned many of the right lessons. I think one of the most eye-opening things when you look at Hezbollah's speeches of its secretary generals and the interviews given by its leaders and commanders over the last 30 to 40 years is how closely Hezbollah does follow developments in the Israeli military, down to the day-to-day.
You address Hezbollah, the experience accrued by Hezbollah at great cost, I may add, in its fight in Syria, its exposure to new concepts and command and control methods, not only by the Iranians, but also by the Russians. And do you conclude that this is going to make Hezbollah a more formidable foe in the next war of Israel, or perhaps reverse the asymmetry that tended to favor the weak?
I think there's no doubt that Hezbollah has learned some very valuable lessons militarily fighting in Syria. You know, urban warfare, large-scale land assaults, because the type of fighting they're doing in Syria is quite distinct from the fighting they were doing in the bushy terrain of South Lebanon, ambushing IDF convoys, and even different than the 2006 war when they were fighting within the villages of South Lebanon. They've also benefited from brushing shoulders with the Russians.
Absolutely.
And that's including exposure to some of the Russian intelligence collection capabilities and to some of the Russian technology and missiles. That being said, they've also lost, by now, somewhere within the range of 1,500 to 2,000
We know the
fighters.
great cost suffered by Hezbollah, but I want to end on a note that you point out, very interesting, that the IDF is actually, in a way, suffering from the very, very intimate ties that it has with the U.S. military, in that it tries to emulate and mimic American doctrine without tailoring it to its own situation and its own operational environment. Please.
I spent a lot of time in the second half of the book sort of examining some of the IDF's own innovative theories and operational concepts, which they adapted and adopted throughout the 80s and 90s, which sort of played out in 2006. And sometimes those operational concepts were not appropriate for the IDF's distinct circumstances. Hezbollah is very different than Saddam Hussein's Iraqi army in the first Gulf War, and very different than the Taliban.
Yes.
So some of those lessons were not necessarily translatable, and I think the IDF has made a very, very concerted effort, particularly since 2006,
Raphael
to refine
Marcus,
and adopt better.